The demolition of the Orion Tower was routine, brutal work. In July of 2022, a 10-ton elevator counterweight was dropped from the 20th story. It struck the ground with a sound like contained thunder, fracturing along a network of internal stresses. A worker, hosing down the pulverized concrete to control the dust, saw something that did not belong. Not rebar, not aggregate. It was the saturated navy blue of a winter coat, and beside it, the unmistakable chalk-white curve of bone. At that moment, the 20-year-old case of the disappearance of Emily Carter, who vanished in December of 2002, was reopened. It was no longer a mystery. It was a tomb, violently broken open. December 10th, 2002. Chicago was being consumed by a lake-effect snowstorm that muffled the city in a blanket of white. Inside the library of the Chicago Institute of Design, however, the world was silent for a different reason. 25-year-old Emily Carter was putting the final touches on what she believed was the work of her life. Her desk was an organized chaos of sketches, rulers, and reference books. She worked with an intense, quiet focus that made her seem older than her years. The Orion Tower competition was more than a student project. It was a kingmaker. The winner would not only receive a substantial prize, but would have their concept integrated into a landmark skyscraper. For Emily, it was everything. Her design, a revolutionary load-bearing exoskeleton, was audacious, a piece of structural poetry that promised to redefine the city's skyline. It was the kind of idea that could make a career overnight. She wasn't the only one who knew it. Her closest rival, Lana Winters, was a constant presence during those final weeks. They were a study in contrasts. Emily, the quiet innovator; Lana, the polished networker. They shared coffee, critiqued each other's drafts, and maintained a friendship sharpened by a fierce, unspoken professional jealousy. Lana had been particularly fascinated by the exoskeleton concept, calling it genius, even as her own more conventional designs struggled to stand out. That evening, Emily packed her bag carefully. The centerpiece was a rigid black portfolio tube containing her original hand-drawn schematics for the Orion Project. A classmate saw her by the exit and asked about her plans. Emily's response was brief, a little strained. She said she was meeting Lana at the Orion construction site. There had been a misunderstanding with the submission files, and she needed to sort it out in person. She seemed resolute, clutching the portfolio tube like a shield. Her last known human contact was a phone call to her mother at 6:15 p.m. She promised to be home late, but not too late. She said she loved her. The call lasted less than a minute, a simple, everyday checkpoint. She then stepped out of the warm, amber light of the university and into the descending curtain of snow. Her mother called her cell phone at 9 p.m., then again at 10. Both calls went straight to voicemail. By midnight, the snow had stopped falling, leaving behind a city transformed, pristine, and unnaturally quiet. The silence that began for the Carter family that night would stretch into weeks, then months, then 2 agonizing decades. Within the hour, the chaos of demolition gave way to the controlled choreography of a major crime scene investigation. The Orion Tower site, a wasteland of twisted steel and rubble, was now illuminated by the sterile floodlights of forensic units. The primary evidence was not a weapon or a bloodstain, but a fractured sarcophagus of industrial concrete. Investigators worked under the silent gaze of the crane that had, by sheer chance, become the key to a 20-year-old secret. The remains of Emily Carter were carefully excavated from the aggregate. The dry, airtight environment of the counterweight had resulted in a state of natural mummification. Her winter clothes were almost perfectly preserved, the fabric stiff but intact. Her university identification card, clipped to the lapel of her coat, provided an immediate, heartbreaking confirmation of her identity. Pathologists noted her posture with clinical precision, hands drawn up to her face, fingers curled, in a gesture that spoke not of defense, but of profound despair. The concrete itself became a silent witness. Samples were rushed to the lab for analysis. The report came back within 24 hours. It was a standard, high-density mix, grade 400, used for structural counterweights. The key finding, however, was in its formation. The pattern of the aggregate and the faint grain impressions on the outer surfaces proved it had been poured on-site into a custom-built wooden mold. This was not a prefabricated block. It was filled right here, on this very ground. Forensic technicians, working with brushes and tweezers, spent hours examining the inner surfaces of the cavity that had held the body. They found something infinitesimal, yet vital. Microscopic synthetic fibers, deep blue in color, stubbornly clinging to the rough concrete. They did not match the wool of Emily's coat. They did not match her cotton scarf or her denim jeans. They were foreign. They belonged to someone or something else. A portable 3D laser scanner was brought in to create a perfect digital model of the cavity. The scan revealed another anomaly, an imprint that the naked eye had missed. Near the base of where the body had rested was a faint, perfectly cylindrical void, approximately 90 centimeters long and 10 centimeters in diameter. Whatever object had created it had long since disintegrated into dust, but its ghost remained, captured in the hardened concrete. A scroll of blueprints, a roll of documents, a secret worth burying. The initial profile of the crime began to shift. This was not a random abduction. This was not a body dumped in a moment of panic. To use an elevator counterweight mold as a casket required specific, intimate knowledge of the Orion Tower construction site. It required access, timing, and an inhuman level of cold calculation. The killer knew the concrete was scheduled to be poured. They knew that once it was, Emily Carter, and the truth she carried with her, would be sealed away, destined to serve as a silent, unseen counterweight in a skyscraper that was never finished. For Detective Harvey Bullock, consulting on the newly reopened case was a ghost returning to his desk. In 2002, he was a young, ambitious detective, and the Emily Carter disappearance was his first confounding failure. The old case files, brittle with age, told a story not of a flawed investigation, but of an investigation that never truly began. In the critical first 48 hours, the narrative was shaped by assumptions. A bright, stressed-out student, final exams. The possibility of a voluntary departure was given far too much weight. The snowstorm that night provided the first layer of insulation for the crime. By the time Emily was officially reported missing, any potential tracks, any sign of a struggle outside the library had been buried under a foot of fresh snow. The city was a clean slate. The investigation turned inward, to her life, her friends, her digital footprint, primitive by today's standards. They found nothing. No jilted lover, no secret life, no cry for help. The focus inevitably shifted to the Orion Tower construction site, the last place she was reportedly headed. And that is where the investigation met a wall, not of concrete, but of corporate legal power. Orion Development, the multi-billion-dollar consortium behind the project, saw a missing person case linked to their flagship project as a public relations catastrophe. Their lawyers moved swiftly, citing safety regulations and insurance liabilities to heavily restrict police access to the sprawling, chaotic site. Every request for employee rosters or delivery logs was met with delays and heavily redacted documents. The official position of the developers was that no meeting had ever been scheduled there. Lana Winters, when questioned as a routine matter, denied any plan to meet Emily, stating they had rescheduled by phone due to the weather. With no evidence to the contrary, her statement was accepted. The police were encouraged to pursue the more palatable theory of a random abduction, a crime that happened somewhere else, somewhere far from the developers' balance sheets. Without a body, and with a key location effectively shielded from proper scrutiny, the investigation withered. No body, no ransom, No crime scene. The case grew cold with the winter, relegated to a file cabinet and the quiet corners of Harvey Bullock's memory. The silence that descended was not merely the absence of clues. It was a manufactured quiet, a form of complicity engineered by men who feared financial exposure more than they valued a search for the truth. The city's machinery had chosen its priority, a skyscraper's schedule over a young woman's life. Detective Harvey Bullock began the painstaking work of reanimating a 20-year-old world. He spoke with ghosts. Emily Carter's parents, now in their 70s, recounted their daughter's final weeks through a haze of grief that time had not diminished. They remembered her being stressed, yes, but also exhilarated. She was on the verge of something, she told them. She mentioned Lana Winters often, speaking of their rivalry with a mix of respect and a faint new trace of suspicion. But it was nothing tangible, just the emotional static of a life cut short. Former classmates were tracked down across the country. They were architects, professors, and parents now, their university days a distant chapter. Their memories were fragmented, impressions worn smooth by time. They recalled the fierce competition between Emily and Lana. Some remembered Lana being unusually complimentary of Emily's work, almost obsessively so. Others recalled a chill between them in the final days, a friendship fraying under pressure. But no one recalled a threat, an overt act of aggression. It was all nuance and shadow, useless in a court of law. Interviews with former Orion Tower construction crew yielded even less. They were old men now, their bodies bearing the cost of a life in hard labor. They remembered the project for its chaos and the eventual collapse of its funding. The winter of 2002 was just another brutal season. Security was lax, schedules were fluid, and subcontractors moved through the site with little oversight. The idea that someone could have accessed an elevator shaft unnoticed on a snowy night? To them, it wasn't just possible, it was probable. With the human element providing only atmosphere, the investigation turned to paper. The archives of the defunct Orion development were a logistical nightmare, a warehouse full of molding boxes containing financial records that charted a course to bankruptcy. There was no useful data here, no personnel logs for that specific week, no detailed pouring schedules. The company had died, and it had taken its secrets with it. The team then moved to the Chicago Institute of Design, requesting all records related to the 2002 Orion Tower competition. Here, the evidence was pristine, preserved with academic diligence. Bullock and his team spent days in a climate-controlled room, sifting through judging notes, submission forms, and administrative correspondence. They were looking for a crack, any small inconsistency in the official narrative. They found it not in a formal report, but in the most mundane of places, a digitized maintenance log from the architecture building. The entry was dated December 3rd, 2002, 7 days before Emily Carter disappeared. A janitor had filed a work order for a new bulb in a drafting lamp in Studio C. In the comments section, the custodian had added a handwritten note, a small piece of bureaucratic color. The note read, "Called in for lamp. Found large coffee spill on floor and table, cleaned up. Threw out some ruined drawings that were on the floor. Heard 2 female students having a loud argument down the hall before I went in. Sounded serious." The janitor's note about an argument was a tantalizing piece of texture, but it lacked a name. As Bullock cross-referenced the timeline, his eyes were drawn back to a thicker section in the original 2002 file. It was a lead that had consumed weeks of his life back then, a theory that felt both compelling and deeply personal. 1 month before she vanished, Emily Carter had filed a formal academic misconduct complaint against Professor Alistair Finch, a titan of the structural engineering department. She accused him of plagiarizing a graduate student's work in a published paper. The motive was pristine. For a man of Finch's stature, such an accusation was not a nuisance, it was a potential career killer. Silencing his accuser would be a permanent solution. Bullock remembered the interviews. Finch had been dismissive, arrogant, and his alibi for the night of December 10th was thin. He claimed to have been working late in his office, alone. It was plausible but entirely uncorroborated. The theory was that Finch, an expert in concrete and construction, could have easily understood the workings of the Orion site. The new investigation pursued this lead with renewed vigor. They found Alistair Finch living in a quiet retirement community in Arizona. He was 78 years old, frail, but with the same condescending intellect Bullock remembered. He treated the detectives with disdain, denying everything, his story unchanged after 2 decades. For a week, the team dug into his life, re-examining his financials from 2002, looking for any unusual activity, any connection, however faint, to the materials or personnel at the Orion Tower. The case seemed to be solidifying around him. The audience, following the logic, began to see the face of a killer in the old professor. The theory held for 11 days. It collapsed not with a bang, but with the quiet arrival of a fax. Pressed by the renewed investigation, Finch's lawyer submitted a set of medical documents that the professor had, for reasons of personal pride, refused to disclose in 2002. On the afternoon of December 10th, Alistair Finch had checked into a private clinic in suburban Naperville for a painful but minor surgical procedure. He was kept overnight for observation under light sedation. Hospital records, time-stamped and irrefutable, confirmed he was discharged at 10 a.m. on December 11th. He had not been working late in his office. He had been in a hospital bed, 30 miles from the city, physically incapable of orchestrating a complex murder and concealment. The most promising lead, the spectre that had haunted Bullock for 20 years, was an illusion. The investigation was back at zero. With the Alistair Finch theory in ashes, the investigation was adrift. Detective Bullock found himself back in the evidence room, staring at the few tangible pieces of the puzzle, the grainy 3D scan of the cylindrical void, and the lab report on the microscopic blue fibers. They were facts without a story, answers to questions no one knew how to ask. It was then that a call came in from a man named Arthur Abernathy, the head archivist at the Institute of Design, a position he had held for over 40 years. The news coverage of the Orion Tower discovery had jogged a memory, something he felt was important. Abernathy led Bullock not to a digital file, but to a physical storage room in the library's sub-basement, a place that smelled of aging paper and preservation chemicals. Here, the complete submissions for every major student competition were kept. After 20 minutes of searching through labeled archival boxes, he pulled out a large, flat portfolio case marked Orion Tower Competition 2002. Inside were the final submissions from every student. Lana Winters's portfolio was there, a pristine collection of computer-aided designs, sleek and professionally bound. Then Abernathy pointed to the next file. It was labeled Emily Carter, but the work inside was clearly not her final submission. It consisted of photocopies, some slightly skewed, and a few reprinted digital renderings. Clipped to the inside cover was a formal administrative note, dated December 6, 2002. It was a statement signed by Lana Winters. The note explained that, while helping Emily prepare her materials for final judging, there had been an accident. A large coffee was spilled, completely destroying Emily's original hand-drafted schematics. The note stated that Lana, feeling responsible, had helped Emily reconstruct the portfolio from backup files and earlier drafts. It was presented as an act of collegial support, but Bullock now saw it for what it was: a confession hiding in plain sight. The janitor's log, the argument, the ruined drawings, it all snapped into place. The coffee spill was the pretext. Lana had stolen Emily's original work. The confrontation at the Orion site was not about a misunderstanding. It was about Emily, with her true original blueprints in her portfolio tube, confronting a thief. The cylindrical void in the concrete was not a mystery anymore. It was the ghost of the evidence that would have exposed Lana Winters and ended her career before it began. The final, irrefutable link came from the blue fibers. The lab ran a deep analysis, cross-referencing them with textile databases from the period. The fibers were a rare synthetic silk, used exclusively in the lining of a specific line of high-end Italian portfolio cases sold for only 2 years. They were notoriously expensive. Bullock's team scoured university archives, and in a photo from a student awards ceremony in November of 2002, they found their proof. It was a picture of Lana Winters, smiling, accepting an award. And tucked under her arm was the distinctive deep blue Italian portfolio case. The motive was no longer a theory. It was a certainty, as hard and as cold as concrete. Based on all the evidence, the final hours of Emily Carter's life can be reconstructed with chilling clarity. On the evening of December 10, 2002, she did not go to the Orion Tower site for a simple conversation. She went for a reckoning. In her hand, she carried the black portfolio tube, not just her project, but the irrefutable proof of her genius and of Lana Winters' theft. The construction site was their chosen arena, a skeletal cathedral of concrete and steel, isolated by the silent, swirling snow. The confrontation was quiet, its fury contained. Emily, standing in the shadow of the unfinished tower, would have laid out her accusation, not with shouts, but with the cold, precise language of a designer. She had the original drafts, the metadata, the proof. Lana, faced with the complete collapse of her ambitions, had a choice. She could confess and be disgraced, or she could refuse and be exposed. She chose a third path. We cannot know the exact weapon. It was likely an object of opportunity from the debris-strewn site, a length of pipe, a heavy tool. The act itself was sudden. One moment, there were 2 brilliant young architects arguing over their futures. The next, there was a dense, percussive sound that the falling snow quickly absorbed. Emily Carter fell without a cry. The portfolio tube, the reason for the meeting, rolled from her grasp and came to a stop a few feet away. The pristine white ground around her began to darken. In the minutes that followed, Lana Winters' panic was replaced by a chillingly logical assessment of her new reality. She was an architect. She understood structures, materials, and schedules, and she saw, on a lower floor of the deserted site, the perfect vessel. A large, custom-built wooden mold, braced and ready for the next morning's pour. An elevator counterweight, a 10-ton block of anonymity. The work was physically demanding, fueled by adrenaline and terror. She moved Emily's body to the mold. The scene was one of grim, methodical effort. She placed the body inside the cavernous wooden box, positioning it as best she could. Then she retrieved the black portfolio tube. She understood that burying the victim was not enough. She had to bury the motive. She placed the tube inside the mold with the body, a final damning piece of evidence sealed alongside its owner. Hours later, just before dawn, she was gone. At 5 a.m., as scheduled, a concrete mixer rumbled onto the site. A crew, numb to the cold, connected the chute to the mold and began the pour. A viscous grey liquid filled the wooden frame, covering first the portfolio, then the navy blue coat, then the hands drawn up to a silent face. It filled every void, displacing the last pockets of air, creating a perfect, seamless tomb. As the sun rose on a snow-covered Chicago, Lana Winters' crime had been absorbed into the very foundation of the city's ambition. Detective Harvey Bullock found Lana Winters in her office on the 82nd floor of a skyscraper she herself had designed. She was a titan of modern architecture, surrounded by glass and steel, looking out over a city she had helped to shape. Bullock did not raise his voice. He simply sat down, and with the calm of a man closing a circle 2 decades in the making, laid out the evidence. He spoke of blue synthetic fibers. He spoke of a lost portfolio and a janitor's log. He showed her a three-dimensional rendering of a perfect cylindrical void found inside a fractured block of concrete. The collapse was not sudden. It was a structural failure in slow motion. The famously composed architect, a woman known for her icy control in boardrooms and construction sites, began to tremble. Her carefully constructed world, built on a single monstrous secret, was disintegrating around her. Her televised arrest became the image of the year. The woman who built skylines led from her glass tower in handcuffs, her face a mask of utter desolation. The news sent a shockwave through the city's elite, a stark reminder that the most pristine facades can hide the deepest rot. The trial was brief. The prosecution's case was a fortress of forensic science and archival evidence. The defense had no answer for the blue fibers, no explanation for the ghost of a portfolio tube captured in a 3D scan. Lana Winters remained a silent figure throughout the proceedings, a ghost in her own life. The jury returned a guilty verdict in less than 4 hours. The judge, citing the calculated and cruel nature of the crime, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the courtroom, Emily Carter's elderly parents did not celebrate. When the verdict was read, they simply held each other, their bodies shaking with a grief that had been held in suspension for 20 years. They had received a legal answer, a name and a motive for their loss. But it was a cold and hollow substitute for the life that had been stolen. After the sentencing, Emily's father spoke to the reporters gathered on the courthouse steps. His voice was quiet, devoid of anger. "We have justice," he said, "but we don't have Emily. Justice is a word. Emily was our world." The legal chapter was closed, but the wound remained, a permanent feature of their landscape. The plot of land where the Orion Tower was meant to scrape the sky is now a small public park. It's a quiet, manicured space, an unassuming patch of green dwarfed by the glass and steel giants of the city. A modest bronze plaque is set near a bed of white roses. It reads, "In memory of Emily Carter, truth, buried in concrete, will always find the light." Lana Winters will spend the remainder of her life in a world of concrete walls, a final bitter irony for a woman who used the material to build an empire and a tomb. Her celebrated buildings still stand, but they are viewed differently now. They are no longer just structures of glass and steel. They are monuments to an unchecked ambition that festered into a monstrous crime. Her name is now a permanent cautionary tale, her legacy forever fused to the secret she sealed away. A fragment of the fractured counterweight, her first and most brutal creation, rests behind glass in the Chicago Crime Museum. It is a dense, ugly piece of stone, drawing crowds who stare into its rough texture, trying to comprehend the horror it contained for 2 decades. It is a physical artifact of a story that proved no secret is safe, and no success can be built upon a foundation of violence without an eventual catastrophic collapse. But the true weight of the Emily Carter case is not found in a prison cell or a museum display. It is felt here in the park, on the ground where the demolition crew made their discovery. It is in the skyline itself, a testament to what was built, and a silent reminder of the one tower that was not. Most days, it is a peaceful place, but the silence here is different. It is heavy. The ground remembers what it was forced to hold.